Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Cabbie Conversations. We have a special episode today because we've got another human being in the call with us. I'm joined with James as usual and our good
Hello.
friend Phoebe.
Hello.
So first and foremost, we are going to start with the warm-up topic, which today I'm going to give you a scenario. You have the chance to bring back one person from history. They have to be dead, but you can bring them back from the dead to have a chat with them on this very podcast with a nice cup of coffee. Assuming, of course, they don't go crazy from the fact that they, have to now adjust to the modern existence. Who would you like to bring back? James, who would you like?
I'm gonna go out there and pick like the big one. If you're gonna pick somebody, I would want to pick someone who had the most enormous change on humanity. And to me, one of the people who's had the most enormous change on humanity is Jesus. So I bring back Jesus because I want, let's say about a third of the world follow Jesus currently at the moment. And I kind of want to see what this geezer's all about,
I want to see if he was like maybe he's just a big con artist and like you'll find out.
Yeah,
it would be good to settle
like
the mystery.
Super popular name.
Yeah, maybe he's a modern cult artist. Maybe like he was like the world's best con man. Maybe it's real.
It's actually Noel Fielding.
Actually, exactly.
Phoebe, what about you?
Well, I was thinking about it earlier, and I thought like I'd want to meet someone and tell them about the effect that they had on the world.
Yeah.
So my first thought was like Rosalind Franklin for discovering DNA, and then could tell them everything that's happened since then, and everything that they've contributed to like science basically, and
that's a very good one.
Human health.
I never thought about it that way. You're thinking about it in a very selfless way. It's like
also they'd be just so cool to have a chat with.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I mean, Rosalind Franklin was, really suffered. She was greatly ignored. Her work was stolen.
Watson and Crick hiss.
By Watson and Crick, who supposedly came up with the structure of DNA.
Yeah, but we know that they didn't now.
Yeah, we know that we didn't now.
We know they stole it.
But they were given the Nobel Prize, and Rosalind Franklin wasn't, because she died of cancer, probably due to her work as an X-ray crystallographer.
She was so young as well. She was only like 34 or something.
So, yeah, she's a great person to bring back.
Yeah, I definitely like that idea. There's so many choices for me. I like to think that, there's the old phrase that history is written by the victor. So even though we think we have an idea of how certain people were like people like Henry VIII or somebody, it would be interesting to actually have a conversation with them and to actually like see what they were like in person, whether they lived up to their sort of reputation. But I was thinking about it, and I actually thought, not to be a contrarian, but say you brought back like Caesar, right? He doesn't know what life in Rome was actually like, because he sat all in his palace all day. I would prefer to have somebody who lived in like the mud huts and like plowed the fields all day, or better yet, like a common Roman foot soldier. I'd like to see what he has to say.
Though? That's the question. Do you want the soldiers that were raised from basically nobility, or the ones that came from poorer backgrounds because they? No,
I would prefer the people who got absorbed into it from being invaded.
So like when the Romans invaded Britain, the Britons that they collected or whatever, or Boudicca's posse, which
I want to see how, like, if they got brainwashed and like what they just generally thought. Were they just sort of going along with it, or were they like more idealistic and just sort of
did they buy into the ideology?
Yeah, I mean,
I think in the first period of Roman history, when they went into the army willingly, and they were, sorry, this is completely off topic now.
No,
but it was like an honor to serve in the army. They probably they were fully into the whole Roman ideal. They loved it. It was such an honor.
Yeah,
then
for sure.
after that, probably like you've got no money, you've got no other options.
That's the thing. It's
Maybe
like we kind of already have a good idea of what the people at the top thought throughout nearly all of history. But imagine talking to like someone who was invaded by the Vikings. We're like, I want to hear what they had to say.
Probably a lot of swearing.
Probably, yeah, probably not too happy, but you know.
Or do you know what? Somebody like someone from the Stone Age, that would be fascinating.
Oh, that'd be good too.
Because like we know so little about them. Like we kind of like we kind of guess and kind of, but we know so little. If they, I mean, they could show us so much, but I mean, they'd probably find the food we eat quite unpalatable. It'd be too rich for them, which would be interesting.
Far too sugary.
It'd be interesting far too salty too, I suspect, as well. It would be interesting to see how they could read, like how they would track, how they would read the land, how they could how they interacted and everything.
I'd like to know how they integrated with Neanderthals.
Yeah, no, we could solve a lot of like mysteries with this.
And also, Stonehenge, everyone's got all these like massive theories about it being a super religious site and stuff. I think it was just a big old festival. Like they just had a party.
That was
there's like
music gig place.
There are like stone rings. There's not. I mean, they are the most, except for like you can see those sort of stone rings like in lots of other places, or those the great chalk horses and things like that.
Stone heads as well. It's like, you know, there's all sorts of weird stuff buried around everywhere. I'm sure they had a purpose at some point. I'd also, of course, like to go back and meet the aliens who built the pyramids, but... You know.
I see, yeah, of course. Would you like to meet the first lizard who crawled into the royal family's skin as well?
Well, she's still alive, so...
Yeah, but what about her predecessors?
No, James, you get it all wrong. They metamorphosize every generation. It's actually the same lizard.
Is it something that happens?
Yeah.
It's something that happens on the coronation. The moment they sit on the stone of Scone, like the lizard crawls in through the back of their brain while they pop the crown on their head.
Absolutely, I would love to know.
Or the lizard's actually in the crown.
Slithy.
The lizard's in the crown, and as you pop the crown, it goes into their head. It drills into their head.
Exactly. See, I told you this is going to be a very scientific episode. Obviously, also like people who are like just generally considered to be really just huge evil bastards like Hitler and
I knew you were going to say Hitler.
No, seriously, I just want to know what he was like in person. I don't know.
As soon as you said we're going to talk about people we're going to bring back from the dead to have a chat with, I was like, he's going to say Hitler.
Oh, no, that's... You knew. You read too easily.
It's pure curiosity more than anything.
Are you telling me you wouldn't have a sit down with Hitler?
I mean, to be honest, I'd love to have a sit down with Donald Trump, just because I don't understand him.
He's still alive.
He is still alive, so I can't. But like, exactly, I'd invite him round to tea, and he'd.
I don't think you would understand him any better.
No.
He's just a toddler in a man's body.
Also, we already know like his sort of mannerisms already. I feel like Hitler, we know what he was like in public speaking, but we don't really know what he was like in person.
But we know what Trump is like in the public eye, but we don't necessarily know what he's like in the private eye. He probably is the same.
Worse.
But you know, like the media always contorts individuals, and it would be interesting to see what, you know, the true Donald Trump.
That's very true, but I do think we have a good idea just from like, there are definitely recordings of him when he didn't know he was being recorded and like.
Oh, I mean, of course there was. Grab him by the pussy is like.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, let's not go into American politics because we'll be here all day.
Yeah, definitely. There's better things to talk about.
Yeah, like DNA. What a crazy thing that is, eh? Basically, I'm not going to say much about this topic, but basically, we are going to discuss the ethics of DNA engineering in humans in particular. So why don't one of you
but I wanted
give
to
us...
talk about plants.
We can
you
talk
can bring
about
us some
plants
plants
too.
as well.
I mean, I think
Why don't one of you, big brains, give us small brains an understanding of the very basics of the science of
it. So Phoebe will totally call me out if I'm wrong. But what we're going to particularly talk about is something called CRISPR-Cas9. And Cas9 is a protein that was originally found in bacteria, and they're basically immunoproteins within bacteria that could. So a virus would infect the protein, and then Cas9 would come along and basically track the protein and cut a little segment of the protein off, and it would basically recognize it and keep it. And if the bacteria then got infected again with the virus, it would go along with basically this little strand of DNA. It's like a wanted poster. So it goes along and it reads the genetic code of the virus. And when it finds this specific sequence, it goes, you are this wanted virus. And then it cuts the DNA and kills the virus because it stops the virus from replicating in the bacteria's genome.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so if you don't know, like, viruses, obviously they, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they inject your cells with their DNA, and that's sort of how they infect you. And so what the protein Cas9 does is they have a little snippet of the DNA that the virus carries, and they use that to identify the virus and get rid of it. So obviously the extension of this, the discovery of that, has led to a breakthrough where we can sort of create our own, codes of DNA and give that information to our own DNA, our DNA sequences, so that the cells don't have to do that themselves. Is that right? Am I on the right lines there?
Well, so the idea is that you make a break in our DNA, and then you try and repair the break using homology-directed repair. So you introduce a sequence of DNA as like a framework to repair it against, and you have to find these sites that you're going to make the cut. You need to use this Cas9 enzyme, and let's try and explain this better.
Yeah, you're doing all right.
The sequence that you're trying to cut. The Cas9 enzyme needs to recognize this, so you have a complementary sequence to the sequence you're trying to cut, and you create that. Yeah, you create that wanted poster, and then the Cas9 with this sequence will find that section of DNA, and then the Cas9 is a nuclease, which is an enzyme which cuts DNA, so it makes that cut, and then hopefully the idea is that you can then repair that break using another sequence as the framework. So that sequence could be anything you wanted, whether it's going to disrupt that gene in a disease where the gene doesn't function properly, or it's a gene where you're trying to introduce something new or repair some bases that are wrong and causing a problem.
Exactly. So the result is you can delete a nucleotide, so like one letter in the sequence of or one word in like, say, the encyclopedia, which is our genome, or you can insert a new gene that maybe this person or individual doesn't have, or you can cause gene production of this gene so that to increase, so you make lots of new proteins, or you can halt it, stop less proteins, to make less proteins and halt the function of the gene. Yeah. And this has enormous consequences. So this can stop a lot of diseases. Like, for example, in sickle cell anemia, there is one fault in the genetic code. There is one nucleotide at fault, which is, I think, in people with sickle cell anemia, the amino acid at fault it turns into a valine, which changes the shape of the red blood cell from being a nice donut, if you like, to a sickle shape. And when it's normally a histidine, and it completely changes the shape of the red blood cell, which then affects the ability of this individual to carry oxygen, and then can cause what we call a sickle cell crisis, when it causes mass deoxygenation in tissues within the human.
Just get drained, basically.
Well, sickle cell anemia is really interesting in that if you've got 2 copies of the faulty gene, there's a very high mortality rate, whereas if you've only got one, you can pretty much live your life as normal, and it confers some resistance to malaria as well, which is why it's so widespread in countries that are affected by Plasmodium.
But
so like sub-Saharan Africa, for example.
Yeah, and Brazil.
So essentially, yeah, you can, because so many genetic diseases are caused by, say, just like James said, a small thing in your code that is like in the wrong place, basically. We can sort of create this new code that we want to be in, let the DNA copy it, and that'll make it resistant to it. Now, of course, the ethical dilemma comes in because this isn't necessarily, scientifically, this isn't necessarily limited to preventing diseases.
Well, it should be.
Yeah, obviously. But the same technology could potentially be used to change, unless I'm mistaken, you could basically change any of your DNA sequences with the same technology. Yeah, go on.
Potentially.
Well, the technology is not completely perfect yet. Like, there are still off-target effects where the Cas9 complex will recognize the wrong sequence and then cause a downstream or upstream effect from that. But it doesn't always like have a negative impact. This is why you've got to, if you're going to design a sequence to cut the DNA, you've got to make sure that sequence is completely unique to the area that you want to cut it, and that there's no chance it could bind somewhere else.
Yeah. Because I think there was an experiment that happened with some children, and then
illegally.
It was just like, it just wasn't precise enough, and you can change the
they were
wrong
fine
thing.
In that situation, they were actually completely fine, but it was still illegal and shouldn't have been done in the first place because the technology's just not there yet.
Yeah.
Was it to stop the two twins from having HIV? I think.
That was a different one. I think Ed's talking about the case where I think it was the children who had SCIDs or something, and so the gene.
Oh no, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
This was severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome.
Yes, this was before CRISPR-Cas9 technology existed, and so they just inserted the correct gene into the genome. But like, it's kind of like a faulty cut and paste method.
It caused cancer or something, didn't it?
So
leukemia.
You literally have a paragraph saying like part of the story, and you put a paragraph that's say from chapter 2 in chapter 11. It completely makes no sense, and that's what it's like doing that in your chromosomes. That's what happened because the cutting and pasting, if you like, of the gene was not specific enough. It ended up causing cancer and then ended up killing the children anyway, which is why it's so important this is precise.
Well, the virus they used, it's somehow that accidentally targeted and like a anti-tumor gene, I think, or not anti-tumor, like a gene which helps your cells from preventing them from getting cancer, and just by chance they disrupted that gene, and so they all ended up with
basically
leukemia.
It needs to be very, very precise in order for it to work. But the technology is certainly not far off.
I mean, like, what's it, eGenesis? This is a company in I believe it's the US, which is making xenotransplants for pigs. So a xenotransplant is like, say you take a pig heart and you then give it to a human as like a transplant if they need a transplant. But what they're doing is they're genetically modifying the pigs to be more like humans to basically increase compatibility, and so there's less rejection of the organ. And to do this, so far they've successfully edited 62 genes in one assay. That's a lot, whereas previously they could only manage to do 5 successfully in a new species. That's so the technology, it might not be there yet, but it is completely possible that we could screen for multiple diseases within an individual. And I think there are huge consequences for this, like without even going into say without even like just say screening for genes. This is something that pregnant mothers, for example, screen for what's it called, Down syndrome. And the more successful, the more accurate the screening rate is, the higher the termination of the pregnancy is if the child has Downs. But who's to say that removing Downs people from the human population is necessarily a good thing?
Well, the problem with that is that Down syndrome, well, now, in the past it was a big problem and the mortality rate was really high, but now you can live a pretty good life even with it.
Exactly.
But in certain situations, for example, like familial Alzheimer's disease, which is horrendous, things like that where there really is almost no good outcome, it makes more sense to screen for, especially now.
I might disagree slightly. I think that I will agree that I think the knock-on effects of it are that people who are alive now who have Down syndrome, I think subconsciously, you're right. It sort of makes people think that they're not. What's the word? Like they're sort of not normal, or they're not well. Which isn't necessarily the case in a lot of things.
Or they're not a benefit to society. That's sort of the implication.
Yeah. Well, however, if you can, because the potential...
Is it about a societal benefit, not really, or is it more about quality of life?
That's what I was saying, is that you can be perfectly happy, but a lot of the time, if you're on the low cognitive end of Down syndrome, then you're not necessarily going to have a very good life. And if you can prevent someone from having a very troublesome life, I think that's quite a moral thing to do.
But where do we draw the line? Like, so say we get rid of Down syndrome. What, do we get rid of autism then? Like, because the scope for autism is huge. You could be severely disabled, or you could be a genius. And so do we get rid of autistic people? Because they're a drain on society. They are difficult to deal with. But they still have enormous value in society.
I think ideally you would be able to identify how
hopefully it comes down to quality of life.
Yeah, I think because again, the same with autism, you can, if you're on the medium to high cognitive end, you can have a very successful life. But if you're on the very low cognitive end, you can have a very unenjoyable life. It's sort of naive to say that they're enjoying themselves. You've also got to think about the
parent situation. Like, will they be able to afford, especially in America where your healthcare is not free, and a lot of other countries as well, can they afford to take care of a child that's going to be born with a disability, no matter what it is?
But I agree with your point, James.
Or let's take another identity. Like, let's take being gay. Let's take being trans. People might have religious, conscious objections to these, but these identities are not seen as quote-unquote desirable in society. So should we eliminate these people?
This is assuming there's a gay gene.
Good job there's no gene for it then,
I mean, what if, but like, there might be, there might not be. But what if, it's probably a collection of genes?
Yeah. You could probably get to the point. Yeah, like, I'm sure in the future you'll be able to scope out what people are going to be like when they're born. Like,
if there is a collection of genes or that profiles for this, will we get rid of those will we deem those characteristics inefficient to society, and do we choose to get rid of them?
No, unless it's directly affecting the quality of life. Editing the genome should not be allowed at all.
This is the thing.
That's in my opinion, though.
This is completely what I agree with, but the thing is, I think with the commercialization of science, because science is commercial, There are startups that produce scientific products. I mean, look at IVF. IVF is commercialized these days.
Well, it's also regulated.
It is regulated now, but at the start it wasn't. At the start, you could have like one person could be like one man could father 500 children, and that causes an enormous problem because of confidentiality. That child might actually not know how many siblings they have, but then actually may unintentionally date a sibling. Like, although that's still an ethical dilemma that could be also, an outcome of.
Yeah, when you say it's regulated, it's difficult because unless you have sort of international body, I don't know what the situation was with IVF, but ultimately every country is its own entity. Just because the UK. Yeah, go on.
Do you not think that genetic engineering, I mean, there's been enough films, there's been enough horror stories, like, if it became possible in the future, there would be a governing body over the entire world, surely. Like, it gets that much attention that it's literally a concern on every government. And
well, you would hope so, but you're assuming that countries are willing to work together.
Always, which is not often. There is one or two major conscientious objectors, like be it the climate change, the Paris Agreement or whatever, where countries, decide not to back it.
And countries are especially not willing to cooperate if there's a financial incentive, which I can see there being for this, where, as you say, it's very commercialized. So let's say, you have a private clinic that can let people screen their babies and make them into blonde-haired, blue-eyed things. That gets the money, which obviously then gets the country money. So that's an incentive for them to encourage that sort of business.
Exactly. And like these things are often patented. And so they might patent the selection of certain genes. So say, for example, this company specializes, like a company might have like a gene for like being athletic, but being like a good sportsman has multiple different like qualities that you need. You need to have good hand-eye coordination. You might need to be strong. You might need to be agile. You might need to be fast. Say, but what if there's probably a collection of genes for each of these qualities, but what if this company only uses one gene for each function? You automatically narrow the gene pool massively compared to the other more sizable collection of genes that naturally occur that might also create the same qualities. And that
so you're suggesting that we'll be able to introduce specific genes,
or we will select,
and not just repair ones.
Yeah, so if this becomes like to a more commercial scale with designer babies, say, that companies will just select for certain genes because that's the ones they say have.
That's getting onto a whole other topic. You're getting onto genetics.
But isn't that what we do with plants and stuff now? We basically genetically modify them to be, the way we want them to, right?
Well, we've kind of been doing that since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of agriculture. We select for the ones with a desirable trait and then we breed it.
Yeah, but don't they do that like actually? I could be completely wrong, but like don't they do that with actual genes now with some food? Like
Not in the UK.
Yeah, well there you go. In the US, in the naughty countries.
But this is like a problem.
America.
Yeah.
The reason why I say this is because like things like dog breeding, we have dogs which have massive bulldogs are basically infertile, pugs have breathing issues, Dachshunds have back issues because we inbreed these breeds for desirable traits. And what if we end up without thinking, inadvertently doing this to our own species for desirable traits? I think that's a massive risk.
Also,
and we create a new set of genetic disorders by cutting out a whole load of other ones.
What you're saying is we're basically going to become pugs.
Potentially, yeah.
Well, in an ideal situation, it would only be like life-threatening disorders that you could alter genes for, or.
But this is the thing. It's like
ones that threaten quality of life.
Yeah, but the thing is that the lines do become blurred when, say hypothetically in a couple of decades, it is really easy just to basically edit genes. right? You know, you could have a gene. Say you screen your kid and you're like, well, he's not going to have any genetic disorders, but he's going to be like not very strong. You know, he's going to be a little frail, wimpy kid like I was. So, you know, maybe you'll give him a gene that gives him like the buff gene, and that inadvertently creates all these people.
What's wrong with being weak?
Exactly, but
exactly.
People will start to want that, and there'll be a lot less like.
You mean people will hop on it like a trend?
Yeah, and you know, you can't
gene.
deny. Let's say, you know, we're all saying we wouldn't do that, but imagine if you're going to have a kid and everyone else's kid had been genetically modified to be like really smart. You wouldn't want your kid to be at a disadvantage.
Have you been watching Gattaca?
No, this is just on the back of my mind. Like I'm thinking like a dystopian future.
Yeah, because parents.
I just brought my headphones and my tea.
Parents always want the best interest for their child. They always want their child to be as successful as possible.
Yeah.
And society also want people to be as successful and efficient as possible. And I can totally see this falling into an Aldous Huxley paradigm of like there being an alpha class, a beta class, a gamma class, a delta class, an epsilon class. Like where people who can afford to better themselves do, people who can't don't. And then it also say it becomes cheaper and more people can be super intelligent, super great physicality, super beautiful, super attractive.
If we're making ourselves that intelligent, surely we should know that that's not a good thing.
I mean, this is a thing, but but if it's popular.
There's other areas of science other than just genetics. Population geneticists exist that would monitor things like that, even if it did come to it.
I mean, I would hope that, but with like IVF and stuff, we're seeing that people will potentially pick traits that would maybe be more desirable. Like if you say want to be like a sperm donor for IVF or something, did you go to college? Like in America, did you go to university? Do you what attributes do you have? Because these are sort of things that people care about. For the best interest of their child, because everyone wants their child to be successful. And I think with the natural order right now, you don't have a say in how successful your child will be necessarily beyond like what you can provide as a parent. Genetically, it's completely random. But when we can choose genetically, that will potentially completely change the order.
Also, assuming that you can there's genes which will contribute to your success.
Yeah, well, I think that's a reasonable assumption, isn't it? Like you say, there could be a collection of genes that is identified as sort of like, you know, the smart gene, I suppose.
Well, you could be really, really stupid and completely inept, and yet you understand some portion of economics and become extremely wealthy from that. Like, you don't have to be smart or strong to be successful in life. And there's so many stories of that.
Like an IQ thing, though? Like, you know, IQ is a sort of more quantifiable. I don't know.
No, they're trying to find a link. I don't think they will.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not like we're going to get people who literally all become like math geniuses, but with them, I again, I don't know. But as far as I understand, maybe there may be like a collection of genes that basically give you a higher intelligence overall than the majority of people. And then that will become the new standard. And maybe intelligence is a bad example, but say like, you know, you want your kid to be attractive. You know, you don't want an ugly kid. You give them traits like that, but then again, that creates this sort of new standard of people.
And there's like body trends for your child. You know, like it's then like. We then socially enforce what is desirable on our children, which is not necessarily for us to decide. It's for them to decide, as they are the next generation. What is socially acceptable? What is the socially right thing to do? And I feel like with genetics, unless it is for life-saving reasons, we are potentially meddling with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all definitely all in agreement that we personally would like it to be safe for, you know,
So what's the
life-threatening.
alternative? If you think that this is the way it's going to go, do you think we should not try and research any more into gene editing, even though it could save
Oh no,
a
not
lot
at
of
all.
lives?
Like, it's worth the trade-off, in my opinion. And regard, this is sort of a moot point because, as anyone will know, you know, once the idea is out there, once the knowledge is out there, you can't really stop it. You can't stop people researching it. Now that the idea of CRISPR and all this stuff is out there, you can't. People are going to look into it. So we are going to have to, just find some way of regulating it and stopping people from.
Because at the minute, people are only looking to use CRISPR. Well, from the research I've read, they're only looking to use it for things like diabetes or heart defects and things like that.
No, absolutely. I hope
no one's trying. No one's even thinking about using it for like, I want my child to have a nice nose.
So do you dispute that will be the future then?
I think we're smarter than that.
Yeah, I think I'd
like to think so.
Again, it's not so much that we're not smarter than that. It's just like
we're not that greedy. Maybe is what I'm hoping.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. We kind of. I think we are and we aren't. I don't think it will completely come out how we're discussing it now, but like, if you look at, we're going back to like literature. If you go back to, if you think of George Orwell's 1984, and how there was a surveillance state. Of course, we don't have like the sense that Big Brother is watching us like that. But if we look at our phones and stuff, and the amount of data that comes to our phones, that goes to Google, Amazon, Facebook, whatever, that's very, very similar to what is happening. Like that, although the understanding wasn't quite there, that is technically happening today. And I do think that this will happen. This will happen. Maybe not in the way that we can fully understand it because we're not there yet. But I do think that the Aldous Huxley paradigm of like a hierarchy due to genetic editing will occur, and I think it is something we have to be. It has to be highly regulated. And I think the boundaries of because I think we could edit out humanity in the process and what it means to be human, because diversity is what makes us human, and I think that we could potentially edit out the diversity which makes us brilliant, and I think that's something to be really thoughtful about.
Yeah.
Just because it's challenging to be a certain way, should we edit out schizophrenia because there is a genetic basis for schizophrenia? Should we edit that out?
Maybe we should ask some people with schizophrenia.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I think the problem is like, even if, let's say, there was a sort of international body that everyone listened to and that regulated this sort of stuff. Again, it's like, where do you draw the line between genetic disorder and just a character trait? like I said,
genetic disorder is a genetic disorder.
Well, no.
If a protein isn't functioning
disorder,
properly, then you'll end up with a genetic disorder. Not a character trait could just be a variation in a gene, or it could be a slight change in expression during development. Like that's something that at the minute with no chance we're going to be able to alter.
Yeah, but like, so for example, if you were, how to say it, you can be in a certain. If you're like a really frail individual, like sort of, weak immune system type, then that will make you more susceptible to getting illnesses and stuff, right? So is that something that we should then edit out with this DNA editing technology? Stuff that is like perceived as disorders. I mean, getting
ill a lot is a lot different from potentially getting ill and it killing you.
Yeah, and like it goes back to the whole like autism thing, because autistic people can be very intelligent, more so than people, like average people. So, as much as I would say, it's probably a good idea to not ideally you wouldn't want people suffering their whole lives of autism, but you're sort of ridding the world of that variation,
a different way of thinking.
Different way of thinking, yeah.
I'm sure a lot of
the question
people
is where
with
you draw the
autism
line.
wouldn't consider themselves as suffering.
No, so you're saying like you wouldn't draw the line there.
But somebody's parent might. Somebody's parent
Exactly.
might view autism, because raising an autistic child is challenging. It's probably more challenging than a neurotypical child. So where is that the parent might choose for their own benefit to edit that, to remove that likelihood, when that child could have the potential to be Alan Turing.
Yeah. I mean, even this hypothetical intergovernmental body might say that autism is like an illness and disease and whatever, and therefore you're allowed to edit it out. So it's obviously a bit of a grey area there. Hopefully, like we say, we will be restrained in its usage, I suppose.
And we also need to get a better understanding of these diseases which have a genetic basis as well. I mean, autism, schizophrenia, the genes behind it, although they understand there's a genetic basis through twin studies and such, they don't really understand what collection of genes lead to, or what systems and those genes that are entwined in these systems lead to these different behaviors. And I think it's something that they obviously need to get a thorough grasp on as well.
Did we have any last thoughts? No.
I say, yeah. I think don't be hubristic. Don't be like, we shouldn't be we should assume the worst. I think for a more thoughtful judgment.
Assume the worst of humanity.
Science. Yeah.
I don't think I can do that.
Just because
you're just painfully optimistic, Phoebe.
Because eugenics are prevalent in history, and our history repeats itself, just in a different form.
That's a very good point.
Hopefully not incest.
That's the thing too. I was thinking, you were saying our DNA would get what was it? You'd limit the gene pool. Would that mean that we would start getting more inbred, basically?
Potentially,
not
yes.
Necessarily.
Not necessarily, but potentially. Like in Iceland, for example, the population is really small, and they actually have to do like genetic
Don't they have an app for it?
Yeah, they have to make sure they're not cousins, and like how closely related they are, because the population is so small. They could very likely date a first cousin, a second cousin, and narrow the gene pool and increase the chance of genetic diseases. And this is obviously way, way in the future, when this would be like saying that multiple genes have been edited out, but it could totally happen. Like, look at, I mean, dogs started off as wolves, but look what we have now. We have chihuahuas.
Well, one of the major problems with incest is when you've got a small population, and then when there's a bigger population, you can have a lot of heterozygosity, so not both copies of the gene are the same. So one gene might be bad, but it's okay because the other one's still functional. But when population decreases in size, that one gene that's bad becomes more prevalent. And then when there's two copies of it, it can be really detrimental. So you can start having, trying to think of an example, like in
Huntington's disease.
Leopards. Fine, Huntington's disease. I was going to say, like some leopards.
I want to hear about leopards.
Small populations, they've started to have much shorter tails. Like, it's such a little thing, but
I see.
Because of this like lack of diversity, this one gene which would never normally be seen in two copies gives them shorter tails and whiter paws for some reason as well. But that's obviously not the way they're meant to be, and it could have detrimental effects on them for various reasons, I guess, like balance being one of them. Yeah.
What is whiter paws? What disadvantage does that have?
Maybe it's less camouflaged, or
that's true.
They're less adapted to their terrain because of it, or maybe it has no effect. Like
just less cute toe beans.
Yeah. Well, for example, again with, for me, like hereditary Alzheimer's disease, we would never have noticed it was a bad disease when the life expectancy was 40. But as people are getting older and it sets in, say, late onset 65, it's now becoming more prevalent.
Yeah. Yes, that's the pros and cons of a longer life expectancy, I suppose.
Longer lifespan, reduced health span.
Exactly. I suppose that's the topic for another day.
It is.
So yeah, were there any final thoughts on this? Other than humanity is doomed to become a George Orwell novel.
Aldous Huxley novel.
I do think some of the plant genomics is pretty cool, like engineering rice to have is it vitamin C or something? Golden rice.
Is
golden rice.
Is that how we? So what I was trying to say earlier that I didn't, because I was stupid, was like, is it how we basically genetically modify food then with this sort of thing?
Yeah.
Or is it still like selective breeding?
I think they've moved a bit beyond selective breeding now.
Yeah. So we actually have
the introduction of genes from other plants that, like making purple tomatoes because they're better for us.
How do you feel about mad scientists creating their own plants, Phoebe, as the plant expert?
I love it. It's all I look at all day is genetically modified plant materials.
To what end, though? Like, what does it do?
I mean, there's some exciting stuff and there's some not exciting stuff. Like, I'm looking at the way plant roots bend when they're tilted off their axis. I'll leave you to judge whether that's exciting or not.
I guess as well, it's like for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, and improving the yield of plants so that you can get a higher crop density in a smaller space.
Another thing, so we could genetically modify crops to better deal with climate change.
Yes,
so
we could.
This is a good thing because obviously it means that it prevents famines and stuff. But does that mean we shouldn't halt up does that kind of give us an excuse, if we technically can, to not halt climate change?
I think it's there as a backup rather than anything else.
At this point,
and if the world floods, there's no amount of genetically engineered plants that are going to save us.
This is true.
You sure?
I mean, unless
just
they all
eat algae.
Yeah, let's just grow sweet corn on algae, you know, what we'll do.
You ever seen Waterworld? We'll just live like that, but we'll have plants. It'll be sick. I just wanted to touch on plants because I knew you were the plant expert.
Phoebe is plant expert.
I do love my plants.
But yeah, thanks very much for listening. If you have your own views, leave them in the comments below. Tell us about how we're all wrong and we don't know what we're talking about. Please, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.